So continuing our discussion on navigation component, adding a nav host to an activity. So we saw creating a nav graph, now how to add a nav host. So nav host or navigation host is a core part of the navigation component, and it is an empty container um, which is responsible for swapping the destinations in and out. It must derive from NavHost, and the component default is a NavHost fragment. Okay, so here is an example. To your main activity, you would add Android X fragment app fragment container view, for example, and um, this can be added by code like this, or you can also add it by dragging from palette containers navhost fragment. Okay. Now let's look at some attributes here. So the name Android name attribute contains the class name of the navhost implementation, which is the navhost fragment. But again, you can create your own custom navhost if you need. Um, the nav graph attribute here at the end tells it which navigation graph to use. So this is the one, as we have seen, it specifies all the destinations and actions for this. I mean, basically the destinations are important here. It specifies all the destinations that this container can swap in and out. And finally, we have app default navhost equals true, which ensures that your navhost fragment intercepts the system back button and it knows what to do with it. Um, and there can be only one default. So if you have multiple hosts, that is multiple activities, um, make sure you specify only one and handle it properly. All right, now adding destinations. So on the nav editor, navigation editor, besides the home button, etc., there was this plus button or add destination button. When you click on it, it creates a pop-up like this. You can add any existing activities or fragment as destination by searching here, or you can create a new destination by clicking here, or you can add placeholders destinations for designing purposes. So um, placeholders basically represent any unimplemented destinations, and they serve as visual representation to help you design. So if you are not sure of what design to use yet, or when you're simply creating that navigation flow, um, you should you can use the placeholders, but the they must be changed to actual destinations, existing destination classes before running the app. So placeholders will not cause any compilation error. And if you have not replaced them with actual classes, you will see a crash at runtime. So be careful with them. Make sure all of them are replaced eventually. You can also add dialog fragments, like delete. You want to delete something, and there has to be a confirmation dialog. It can be done in the nav graph. Uh, Only changes change the fragment element to a dialog element, and then it will be shown as a dialog. So if you have an existing dialog fragment, use the dialog element for that. Um, as you can see here, rest of it is fairly straightforward. You specify the ID, you specify the name, and then you can have arguments and actions, as this example shows. Okay, so some apps can have a lot of flowing moving parts, and in those cases, it is recommended to use nested graphs to encapsulate certain parts that are cohesive and that are kind of, you know, different differently connected to the rest of the app. So particularly, login flows are a good example. Any other specific subflows uh, can be represented as nested graphs because there is a certain flow between them. um, the another advantage here is it by creating nested graphs, the main flow remains easy to manage. um, One more point is nested graph themselves are usable. So um, you can have the entire nested graph as a destination of one of the actions. And they also provide encapsulation, that is, um, destinations outside the nested graph don't don't directly go to the individual destinations inside the nested graph, but they go to the nested graph itself, and then logic within the nested graph will take care of where they will land. So, with login flows, typically you have login, then you have um, login with different login in different ways. Um, if you forget the password, there will be a pop-up, or if your password is not strong, there should be a certain pop-up. If you forget password, there should be a way of resetting it. There should be a way of changing password, and so on. So all of that can happen in its own nested graph, and you don't have to have those 6 7 screens as part of your main nav graph. So here is an example from the official documentation. The entire registration is put inside this nested graph, and then there is a game. So you start from the home screen, you go to the game, declare winner, declare loss, etc., etc. So all of that can happen, and from the main screen, the home screen, you can go back to the registration. Um, so the flow is, if you are logged in, this is where you will land, and this is where you will land by default. But you will check if a user is logged in. If they are not logged in, you'll send them here. That is the idea. Okay. So yeah, this is how you can take care of some complex but cohesive flows. All right, now navigating to a destination. How do you navigate to a destination? You basically use the nav controller, which corresponds to a nav host, and there are several ways of doing things. We'll discuss only two of them here: using the safe args, which is the recommended way, and using the IDs of actions, which is the next best, I would say. All right, so safe args, we saw that safe args is a plugin which generates compile time type safe classes or navigation actions for you. And this is the recommended way because it lets you um, it lets you create those type safe um, type safe actions, and also it makes it easy to pass arguments to the actions. Okay, so um, let's first see how to enable that. So in the top level Gradle file, not the app level, the top level Gradle file, you have to specify a dependency on the navigation safe args Gradle plugin. And then in the app level or module level Gradle file, you have to enable the plugin Android X navigation safe args. Doing this, um, doing this basically ensures that there will be automatically generated classes for each destination where the action originates. So um, it will parse the nav graph file, and it will determine which destinations need actions, and it will create um, appropriate classes for those. So what type of classes? Um, here is an here is an example. So generated class name adds direction to the originating destination class name. That is, for example, if you have an originating destination, that is an originating fragment or a node, which is named specify amount fragment, then the generated class will be named specify amount fragment directions. And then you'll be able to use it like this. So that generated class then contains a static method for each action. So if it has, actions 1, 2, 3, it will have a method for action 1, action 2, and action 3. And from there, um, it takes any defined action parameters basically as arguments, um, and it returns a nav directions object that you can pass to the navigate. So you call that method, you get the nav directions, and you'll pass it to the navigate method. By the way, navigate method is in the navigation component, which you use to tell um, the nav host that now you are navigating to another component. So here is an example. So assume we have a navigation graph with two destinations, specify amount fragment as the origin and confirmation fragment as the destination. Um, and there is a single action connecting the two. So let's also assume that this second fragment, um, confirmation fragment, takes a single float parameter, which is the amount. Like this is part of a big, say, some banking transaction, and you want to confirm if it's going to, if the user wants to send a certain amount, which can be represented as a float. So with this, safe args parameter will generate for you a specify amount fragment directions class, as we saw. And inside that, you'll have a static method action specify amounts fragment to confirmation fragment. And it will also generate an inner class named action specify amount fragment to confirmation fragment. Okay. Now, this inner class is derived from nav directions, and it stores the associated action ID and float parameter. So those will be fields inside it. And what it returns, we can use it to actually cause the navigation, as we'll see here. Okay, so the click listener here will have some float amount, blah, blah, blah. And then the action will be um, specify amount fragment directions dot the method action specify amount fragment to confirmation fragment, and you pass it the amount. So the key point is you can pass all your arguments to the actions like this. So if there are if the action takes more than one arguments, you'll simply specify them here as arguments of this function call. And it returns an action which is of the type nav directions. And then um, you call navigation, find nav controller for this view, which will be the host that has been already created. And then you simply call navigate action. And this is how you will go from the source fragment to the destination fragment, bypassing, with arguments being passed to it. And I mean, remember the transactions and the fragment manager and creating arguments and passing arguments to that. So this is how it simplifies all the flow. Plus, clicking the back button will bring you back to this automatically. You don't have to handle it in any other way. You don't have to do anything else for that. Okay, the second second best recommended way is using the IDs. So IDs can be, you can use this navigate int method, which can take IDs of the action or destination. But it is recommended that you use the action IDs whenever possible, because actions can provide additional information, including animations, and they also visually show you where you are going or how you are going. And using the actions keeps your navigations consistent with the navigation graph. Otherwise, you could create any um, and you could launch any fragment from anywhere, and it won't be type checked type safe at compile time, and you'll get a failure. Um, yeah. So by creating action, you can replace resource IDs with type safe args generated operations, which gives you compile time safety. That's another reason why you should be using actions. All right, navigating using the IDs. This is how you would do it. So here is an example of a view transaction button, um, which has a click listener, which takes the find nav controller for this view and then calls navigate with the action, view transactions action. So from here, you're going there. So presumably this is part of your navigation graph. All right. Um, So when you define an action in the navigation graph, navigation generates a corresponding nav action class, which contains the configurations defined for that action. And what are those? So you can provide a destination, as we have seen. You can provide default arguments. That is also something we have seen. And it creates a bundle containing um, the default values for the target destination. Um, and you can provide other navigation options. They're represented as a nav options class, and it contains all the special configurations for the transition. Um, and one important example or sample is animations. So as I said, when you're going from one fragment to another, it can simply load, or it can have certain animation associated with it. Another thing is pop behavior. So when you click the back button, um, you usually pop only the top fragment, but sometimes the flow makes sense such that you pop off a few other things from the top. Okay, so that is the pop behavior you can specify here. And you can also specify whether the destination should be launched as a single top. So remember when we talked about stack and back, tasks and back stack, um, you can create a new stack with a certain view as the top when you create it. So you can specify that over here. Previously, we used to do it using intents. Um, Now it's part of using this component, architecture component, it's part of the same flow. Okay, and finally, here is an example. So what we have here, we have a fragment um, A, and then it has an action A to B, and it specifies the destination, and it has enter animation, default enter, it has exit animation, default exit, and so on. And when you're popping, it has its own default animations as well. So there are a couple other options in the standard library, and you can use them. So I think one example is swiping left and swiping right when you're entering or exiting it, like you see on a scrollable tab um, interface. Okay, so that is something you can consider um, if it's appropriate for the use, of course. Okay, but yeah, so the key point here is navigation component simplifies simplifies transitions between different screens. You can add arguments in XML, and you can also specify them in Java code, and you can also um, add animations and several other details in a type safe way using safe args. So that is the recommended way of transitioning. As I said in the beginning, there is some learning curve, but once you get a hang of it, it is good stuff. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll stop here. And that's all the videos I'm going to share this semester. Thank you, guys.